Advanced Residential Applications and Case Studies. Chapter 2, Advanced Residential Appraisal Concepts, page 9. Standards Rule 1-2 continued. Continuing with the list of elements of problem identification from Standards Rule 1-2. In developing a real property appraisal, an appraiser must F. Identify any extraordinary assumptions necessary in the assignment. An extraordinary assumption may be used in an assignment only if Roman numeral 1. The extraordinary assumption is required to properly develop credible opinions and conclusions. Roman numeral 2. The appraiser has a reasonable basis for the extraordinary assumption. And Roman numeral 3. Use of the extraordinary assumption results in a credible analysis. G. Identify any hypothetical conditions necessary in the assignment. A hypothetical condition may be used in an assignment only if Roman numeral 1. Use of the hypothetical condition is clearly required for legal purposes, for purposes of reasonable or for purposes of comparison. And Roman numeral 2. Use of the hypothetical condition results in a credible analysis. And H. Determine the scope of work necessary to produce credible assignment results in accordance with the scope of work rule. Extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, are often misunderstood. We will cover these in more depth on the next page. Simply put, a hypothetical condition is used to appraise a property under a condition that is contrary to known fact. That's highlighted. An extraordinary assumption is used in an appraisal to assume otherwise unknown information as fact. That's highlighted. End of page. Page 10. Problem identification. Steps. Let's briefly consider each of the steps in problem identification. Remember, only after you have identified the problem are you able to determine whether you have the necessary knowledge and experience to complete the assignment competently. Standards Rule 1-2b requires you to identify your client's intended use, because that intended use will have a direct impact on your scope of work decision. A scope of work that is appropriate for an appraisal to be used in a mortgage loan decision may be woefully inadequate for an appraisal to be used in litigation or condemnation, for instance. Also, be aware that complex property issues may conflict with your client's intended use. You should communicate with your client as your understanding of the property issues develops, being careful to inform them of complexities that may be unknown to them, since these may require the client to revise or even cancel the assignment. You should not surprise a client by waiting until delivery of the appraisal report to disclose complex property issues. The appraiser should make the client aware of complicating factors and property issues as early as is feasible. Standards Rule 1-2C requires you to determine the type and definition of value and gives some specific direction if the appraisal is of market value. Other types of value opinions that you may be asked to develop might be liquidation value or value in use. If you have only performed market value assignments, a liquidation value appraisal assignment will require you to carefully determine if you have the needed knowledge and experience to complete the assignment. We will discuss these in more detail later on. SR 1-2C, Roman numeral 4, concerns forming a market value opinion based on non-market financing or financing with unusual incentives. Various approaches may be utilized in such an assignment, perhaps making adjustments based on the time value of money. Again, you must determine your ability to complete such an assignment. How might non-market financing affect the value of a property? Consider the following example. Suppose that two residential properties are located next door to one another, and as much as two properties can be identical, these are, in truth, of course, we understand that there are no two entirely identical parcels of real estate. But for our discussion, let's say these are, for all practical purposes, identical. Both of these identical properties are currently offered for sale. Property A is listed for $225,000, and the consensus opinion among market participants is that this property can be purchased for $210,000 to $215,000. Property B is listed for sale by its owner for $225,000. And she has made it quite clear that she will not accept anything but a full price offer. All things being equal, you would not expect much in the way of interest for property B. But all things are not equal in this instance. Unmentioned in our summary of the properties was the fact that the seller of property B wishes to provide owner financing at a fixed rate of 2.0%, fully amortized over 30 years, with no down payment required. Might these terms convince a typical buyer to consider property B, even though the purchase price will certainly be $10,000 to $15,000 higher than property A? The answer is yes. The below market financing will have a positive impact on the price of property B. Typical buyers will be eager to consider this property despite the difference in price, given the generous financing terms offered. The appraiser usually works in the context of cash or cash equivalency and typical financing. If the definition of value in your appraisal assignment requires you to value the property under unusual or below market financing or unusual incentives, then you must consider the effect on value that these conditions bring about and reflect them in your appraisal process. When appraising for market value, this will not likely be an issue, as most definitions of market value require the appraiser to value the property based on financing terms equivalent to cash, with no unusual or atypical financing or concessions. This would likely mean that the sale price of property B would be higher than its market value. SR 1-2D concerns the effective date of your opinions and conclusions. Most of your appraisal assignments will be based on a current effective date, probably the date of the property inspection. From time to time, however, you may be asked to form an opinion of value based on a past or future effective date with adequate data and a good understanding of market and property characteristics as of a past date. You may find such an assignment to be complex and a complex appraisal that is within your capabilities to perform. Appraising a property with a future effective date, on the other hand, is a good example of an assignment that may require you to seek the assistance of another appraiser with experience in that particular type of work. To complete this assignment, you will have to develop a good understanding of current trends and determine how to project those observed trends into the future while taking into account anticipated market changes. SR 1-2E concerns property-specific issues, some of which we have already touched upon, such as physical property attributes and the property interest to be valued. Other issues include other types of property that may be included in the appraisal, such as personal property or intangible items. Most real estate appraisers are not qualified to develop value opinions for these other types of properties. You, too, would probably need to seek assistance if you were asked to perform such an assignment. Parts 4 and 5 of this rule concern easements, encumbrances, partial interests, physical segments, and other issues that may make for a complex property appraisal. SR 1-2F and G concern appraisals that require the use of extraordinary assumptions and hypothetical conditions. You should be familiar with both of these important appraisal concepts because their use is often necessary in the appraisal of complex properties. An extraordinary assumption is a condition or issue that is believed to be true, although there may be some degree of uncertainty that is directly related to a specific assignment and that could impact your opinions and conclusions if you were to discover it was actually false. For instance, appraising a property without the advantage of viewing the property to the degree that you would normally inspect it may very well require an extraordinary assumption regarding the condition, quality, and amenities of the dwelling. Appraisals of properties for pre-foreclosure often do not allow you to access the property, so you may have to utilize multiple sources of data to form an extraordinary assumption about the property's condition, quality, amenities, etc. A hypothetical condition is contrary to what is actually true. Basically, as the appraiser, you pretend something to be true. An example of utilizing a hypothetical condition is the appraisal of a proposed construction dwelling as if it is already built on the effective date, when in fact the dwelling is not yet built. Of course, whenever you utilize a hypothetical condition, you aren't trying to slip something past anyone, because you will fully disclose a hypothetical condition. Extraordinary assumptions are also always fully disclosed in the appraisal report, by the way. When dealing with proposed construction, it is a little tricky because you may use an extraordinary assumption or you may use a hypothetical condition. Which one you use depends on what you use as the effective date of value. If you use a current effective date, which is typically the date on which you visited the vacant site, on which the improvements are to be built, then you would use a hypothetical condition. Since you are certain of the fact that the building did not exist on the date you visited the site, you would use the hypothetical condition because you are using something about which you know to be false. The building exists. Thus, because of the level of certainty, you use the hypothetical condition that it did exist on that date. If, however, you use a prospective effective date, which is sometimes in the future when you expect the building to be complete and ready to occupy, you would use an extraordinary assumption. The level of certainty about the building being in place on that future date in the manner you described in your appraisal report is less than absolute. Therefore, because you do not know for certain that it will be there, you use an extraordinary assumption that it will, in fact, be there on that future prospective effective date in the manner you described in your appraisal. So, for proposed construction, the principle is current effective date and hypothetical condition. For future prospective effective date, you use extraordinary assumption. End of page.